Hey guys, tonight we're taking a little trip. Not to a sun-drenched beach or a glamorous cityscape, oh no. We're diving headfirst into the chilly, grimy, and often unforgiving streets of historical Stockholm. Imagine the scene: cobbled alleys, slick with who knows what, the clatter of wooden wheels on stone, the ever-present scent of wood smoke, damp wool, and something vaguely fishy. You're not just an observer here, you're about to become a part of it, a young woman stepping into a life that's a far cry from any modern comfort. Honestly, looking at the odds, you probably won't survive this particular simulation with your optimism, or maybe even your fingernails intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not let me know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world? It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The rocking motion of the coastal steamer, or perhaps it was a less distinguished, more agricultural cart, finally subsides. It's been days, a blur of jolting discomfort and the gnawing anxiety of the unknown. You step onto solid ground, your legs still wobbly, your small bundle of worldly possessions clutched tightly in one hand. This is it. Stockholm, the capital. The place whispered about in your little village, a place of opportunity, of grand houses, of a life less predictable than the turning of the seasons back home. Or so you hoped. The air hits you first. It's a riot of smells, a far cry from the clean, earthy scent of the countryside. Here, it's the sharp tang of salt from the Baltic, the pervasive aroma of wood smoke from 1,000 chimneys, the slightly sour smell of unwashed bodies, and underneath it all the unmistakable scent of the sea mixed with something less pleasant. Refuse, perhaps, or the outflow from the tanneries. You wrinkle your nose, a small, unconscious gesture of distaste quickly suppressed. You can't afford to be delicate. Then the sounds. A cacophony that fills your ears and makes your head spin. The clatter of iron-shod wheels on uneven cobblestones, the shouts of dock workers down by the bustling wharves of Skepsbrunn, the cries of street vendors hawking everything from pickled herring to dubious-looking pastries. Horses, whinny dogs, bark, and everywhere the constant murmur and occasional roar of human voices speaking in accents and at a speed that makes your rural dialect feel thick and slow. It's like the whole world decided to have a conversation right here and didn't invite you. You've never seen so many people in one place. Back home, market day was a crowd. This is a human river, flowing and jostling, and you're just a tiny twig caught in its current. Your eyes, wide and a little overwhelmed, try to take it all in. The buildings lean against each other, tall and narrow, their timbered facades painted in hues of ochre-faded red and a surprising cheerful blue. They loom over the narrow streets, sometimes blocking out the sun, creating a perpetual twilight, even at midday. Wooden shutters hang askew on some, while others boast gleaming glass windows, hinting at the wealth within. You crane your neck, marveling at the sheer height of Storkirken, the great church, its spire seeming to pierce the gray sky. This city was officially founded way back in the mid-13th century, and it feels like every single century since then has just piled another layer of grime and stories onto its bones. The people are a spectacle in themselves. Merchants in dark, sober coats stride purposefully, their faces set in expressions of serious commerce. Elegantly dressed ladies, accompanied by companions, navigate the muck with surprising dexterity, their skirts held high. Sailors, rough-hewn and loud, swagger in groups fresh off their ships or looking for a tavern. And then there are the others, the ones whose faces mirror your own anxiety. Newcomers, hopefuls, the desperate, all drawn to the city's magnetic, if unforgiving pull. You see children barefoot and grimy darting through the crowds like little sparrows, their eyes old beyond their years. It's a vivid tapestry, but you're starting to feel less like an admirer in a gallery and more like a loose thread easily plucked. This influx of people like yourself was a defining feature of Stockholm during this period. The city's population swelled dramatically, particularly in the 19th century, as agricultural changes and rural poverty pushed thousands from the countryside towards urban centers in search of work. You are, in fact, a statistic, a tiny part of a massive demographic shift. Not exactly the grand, unique destiny you might have fantasized about during those long nights staring at your village's single flickering street lamp. As you venture further from the docks, perhaps towards the winding alleys of Gamla Stan, the old town, the initial wonder begins to curdle into a more practical and frankly unsettling awareness. The grandeur is there, yes, but so is the squalor. Overflowing gutters release foul-smelling trickles that you have to hop over. Drunken shouts erupt from a nearby tavern, followed by a crash. A woman, her face hard and her eyes hollow, gives you a calculating look that makes you clutch your bundle tighter. This isn't just a bigger version of your village. It's an entirely different beast, and it feels like it could swallow you whole if you're not careful. You might even spot the Fiskerens Clagamore, the Fisherman's Wailing Wall. Not an official monument, of course, but a colloquial term for a stretch of quay where fishermen would loudly lament their poor catches or low prices. It's a quirky, everyday drama, a reminder of the constant struggle for livelihood that underpins city life. It's a stark contrast to the silent, stoic endurance you were taught back home. Here, it seems even complaints are a public performance. Maybe there's a lesson in that. Make enough noise, and someone might actually notice you. Or more likely, they'll just tell you to pipe down so they can hear the herring auction. The sun, a pale disk in the sky, begins its slow descent, and a chill creeps into the air, a damp cold that seems to seep into your bones. The city, which seemed so vibrant and full of promise just hours ago, now feels alien and immense. The realization dawns cold and sharp as the Stockholm wind, whipping off Ridderfjärden, you are utterly alone. No family to turn to, no familiar faces in this sea of strangers. Your small store of coins won't last long. The whispers of opportunity now sound like the taunts of a siren luring you onto treacherous rocks. Historians still argue whether the primary driver for young women migrating to cities like Stockholm was purely economic desperation, or if a desire for greater personal autonomy, however limited, also played a significant role. Right now, as you shiver in a shadowed doorway, wondering where you'll sleep tonight, autonomy feels like a rather cruel joke. Your stomach rumbles a hollow counterpoint to the city's din. The dream of a grand new life is already starting to fray at the edges, replaced by the urgent primal need for shelter and sustenance. This isn't just an adventure. It's a tightrope walk without a net, and you've just taken your first wobbly step. That gnawing emptiness in your stomach and the biting wind are powerful motivators. The brief, romanticized notion of Stockholm as a city of golden opportunity has thoroughly evaporated, replaced by the stark practical need to simply survive the next 24 hours. You can't just stand in a doorway, forever hoping a kindly old merchant will mistake you for his long-lost, slightly grimy granddaughter and shower you with pastries and a warm bed. No, that only happens in the fanciful tales the peddlers use to spin back in your village. Here, you need a Platz, a position, and you need it now. But how does one go about finding such a thing in this sprawling, indifferent metropolis? There are no illuminated help wanted signs, no convenient apps to swipe through. It's a daunting, bewildering quest. You start by observing, by listening. You see other girls, some looking as lost as you others, with a veneer of city-wise toughness, congregating near certain squares or by church walls. You tentatively ask a street vendor polishing apples with a surprisingly clean rag where a girl might find honest work. He jerks his chin towards Munkbron, a bustling square near the water, mumbling something about it being a common hiring spot, especially at certain times of the year. So Munkbron it is. You pull your thin shawl tighter, trying to look less like a startled rabbit and more like a capable, if currently unemployed, domestic asset. Easier said than done when your stomach is performing its own private opera of hunger. The scene at Munkbron is a chaotic mix of hope and quiet desperation. Prospective employers, mostly stern-faced matrons, Fruar and Mamzeller, with sharp, appraising eyes, stroll through inspecting the assembled girls and women, like they're choosing livestock at a market. And in many ways they are. You see girls being poked, prodded, asked to show their hands. Are they strong, calloused, free of blemishes that might offend delicate sensibilities? It's a profoundly dehumanizing experience. You try to stand tall to meet their gazes, but it's hard when you feel about as significant as a loose cobblestone. Some girls are clearly more experienced, perhaps, with a letter of recommendation clutched in their hand from a previous employer. Though, as you'll learn, the value of these can be highly subjective. Scholarly opinion is divided on the extent to which these recommendation letters genuinely reflected a servant's abilities or were merely tools of social control, ensuring conformity to the employer's expectations. Finally, a woman stops before you. She's stout-dressed in dark, practical wool, her face a mask of stern assessment. Her eyes sweep over you, from the worn tips of your shoes to the untidy wisps of hair escaping your kerchief. "You looking for a place, girl?" she asks, her voice devoid of warmth. You nod, your throat suddenly dry. "Yes, mamselle? What can you do?" "What can you do? You can scrub. You can carry. You can mend passably. You can endure." You list your meager skills learned through a childhood of unceasing labor on your family's smallholding. Cooking for a large household. Not really. Polishing silver. You've never seen silver outside of the church altar, but you emphasize your willingness to learn your strength, your honesty. You're pretty sure lying about your non-existent expertise in French pastry techniques would backfire spectacularly. She asks about your background, your family. She wants to know if you're healthy, if you're prone to ailments. She doesn't ask if you have dreams or fears, or if you miss your mother. Those are irrelevant commodities in this transaction. The whole process is governed, at least in theory, by something called the Legostadgan, the Servant Act. This piece of legislation, first enacted in the 17th century and revised over time, stipulated the duties and rights of both servants and employers. It covered things like length of service, often a year from one moving day to another, in late autumn wages, and grounds for dismissal. In reality, it was a law heavily weighted in favor of the employer offering you, the servant, very little actual protection. Your contract, if you were lucky enough to get one beyond a curt nod, would almost certainly be verbal. Some potential employers had peculiar quirks. You hear whispers of one fru who insisted on inspecting a girl's teeth as if buying a horse, believing it an indicator of overall constitution. Another was said to have a strange aversion to girls who hummed while they worked, claiming it disturbed the household spirits. You silently pray this particular mamsel in front of you doesn't believe redheads like yourself, or perhaps you're a brunette. It's your story. Bring bad luck, or set fires just by looking at the hearth too intently. One fringe tidbit you'll pick up later is that some maids swore by carrying a specific type of smooth gray stone in their pocket to ward off unjust accusations from their mistresses. A small, superstitious comfort in a world where your reputation was everything and easily shattered. The woman before you grunts. You look strong enough. Hands, you hold them out. Palms up. They are chapped and rough from farm work, but clean. She nods slowly. The pay is 20 Riksdaler a year, 2 sets of working clothes, and your keep. You'll start as an underman general help. Laundry fires carrying cleaning the lower floors. If you're useless, you're out. Understand. 20 Riksdaler. It sounds like a fortune, then you realize it's for an entire year. You try to calculate how much that is per week per day, but your mind is too clouded with hunger and anxiety. Your keep, that means food and lodging. That's the crucial part. A roof, however leaky. Meals, however plain. It's the difference between slow starvation on the streets and a chance, however slim, to build some kind of life. And no followers. No flightiness. Church on Sundays if your work is done. One afternoon off a month, perhaps, if I'm feeling generous and you haven't broken all the crockery. Sat, one afternoon a month if she's feeling generous. Right. You can already picture yourself marking off the days on a mental calendar that only seems to add more chores. This is less of a negotiation and more of a royal decree. You try to project an air of grateful obedience. I understand, mamsel. I'll work hard. See that you do. Be at this address. She names a street in Södermalm, the southern district known for its working-class character and steep, difficult hills. Before dark, ask for Fru Carlson's house. Don't be late. And just like that, she turns and moves on, perhaps to inspect another hopeful. No handshake, no written agreement, just a verbal command and an address. This is your contract, vague, entirely one-sided, and utterly dependent on her continued and probably conditional goodwill. You have a place, or at least the promise of one. It's not the grand arrival you once envisioned, but it's something. A tiny flickering candle of hope in the overwhelming darkness. Now you just have to find this Fru Carlson's house in a district you've never seen up hills that you'll soon discover are designed to test the leg muscles and the patience of saints, let alone underfed servant girls. The uncertainty of it all settles in your stomach, a cold companion to the hunger. But for now, you have a direction. You have a name. And that, in this bewildering city, feels like a small victory. The address Fru Carlson barked at you turns out to be perched precariously on one of Södermalm's infamous steep inclines. Just finding the house feels like your first unpaid chore, your leg muscles burning from the climb, your breath misting in the rapidly cooling air. You clutch your small bundle, which seems to contain your entire past, and knock tentatively on a sturdy dark-painted door. It's opened not by the formidable Fru Carlson, but by an older girl, her face pale and tired, her apron already showing signs of a long day's work. She eyes you with a mixture of resignation and something that might be faint curiosity, then wordlessly jerks her head for you to follow. So much for a welcoming committee and a hot cup of tea. Though to be fair, you weren't exactly expecting a red carpet and a string quartet. You're led through a dim hallway, catching fleeting glimpses of rooms that, while not opulent, speak of a comfort you can only dream of. Polished wood, the glint of what might be brass or silver, a faint pleasant aroma of beeswax, and something savory cooking. It's a world away from what awaits you. The girl guides you towards a narrow, almost hidden staircase at the back of the house, clearly an afterthought in the building's design. It spirals upwards into deepening gloom, each step creaking ominously under your worn shoes, as if protesting the addition of another burden. The air grows colder with every upward turn. Finally, you reach a low door tucked under the eaves. The girl pushes it open, revealing your new abode. The term room feels generous. It's a garret, an attic space, with sharply sloping ceilings that threaten to acquaint your forehead with the rough-hewn beams if you stand up too quickly in the wrong spot. There's a single small grime-streaked window, more of a slit really offering a thrilling vista of a neighboring brick wall, and a patch of sky the color of dirty dishwater. You imagine the summer sun will turn this into a charming little oven. And in winter, well, you're getting a preview of that right now. The cold in here is a physical presence. It bites at your exposed skin and seems to emanate from the very walls and floorboards. There's no fireplace, no stove, not even the memory of warmth. You can see your breath clouding in front of you. This, you realize with a sinking heart, is where you'll experience the famous Stockholm winters you've heard so much about. You just hadn't pictured experiencing them quite so intimately. Your luxurious furnishings consist of 2, possibly 3 straw-filled pallets lying directly on the floorboards in different corners. One is clearly already claimed a thin patched blanket and a small lumpy bundle indicating its occupant. Yours presumably is the one currently unadorned and looking particularly uninviting. Perhaps there's a communal heap of slightly less thin blankets somewhere, or perhaps you're meant to cultivate your own blubber like a seal. There are a few wooden pegs hammered into one of the beams serving as a wardrobe. No chests of drawers, no bedside tables, certainly no vanities with delicate porcelain pitchers. This is utilitarian living, stripped to its barest, coldest bones. The air is thick with the smell of stale straw, damp wool, unwashed bodies, and a faint lingering aroma of yesterday's boiled cabbage. It's the perfume of poverty, and it clings to everything. You can hear the wind whistling through the ill-fitting window frame, creating a mournful soundtrack to your arrival. Privacy, you can already tell, will be a forgotten concept. This tiny space is to be shared. Any personal life, any quiet moment will be lived out in the company of strangers, fellow cogs in the domestic machine. Historians still debate the psychological impact of such consistently deprived living conditions on servants' overall morale and their relationships with one another. Right now, you suspect it doesn't do wonders for one's general joie de vivre. You'll soon learn that such accommodations were tragically common for domestic servants in Stockholm. While the main parts of the house might adhere to certain building standards, the spaces allocated to servants were often crammed into whatever unusable nooks and crannies were available. Attic cellars sometimes even converted stables. These areas were typically unheated, poorly ventilated, and overcrowded. A mainstream historical fact is that these attics filled with flammable straw bedding and often situated near chimney flues that could be poorly maintained were notorious fire hazards. So you get to freeze and live with the constant thrilling possibility of spontaneous combustion. What a perk. You might hear whispers among the other servants once you get to know them about little rituals to make such a space more bearable. One quirky tidbit: some girls tucked a sprig of dried rowan berries into their straw pallet, believing it would ward off evil spirits, or more practically fleas. Given the conditions, you might be willing to try anything, even if it just means your sleeping arrangements smell faintly of old berries instead of just old, well, everything else. Another might tell you to always sleep with your shoes pointing towards the door, so if trouble comes, your feet are already aimed for escape. Though where you'd escape to is another question entirely. You place your meager bundle on the assigned pallet. It looks pathetically small in this cheerless space. The girl who led you up here has already disappeared, presumably back to the endless tasks that await her and will soon await you. You are alone again, but this time the aloneness is colder, starker, framed by the grim reality of your new home. The excitement, or perhaps the sheer terror of the city, has faded, replaced by a dull ache of disappointment and the dawning comprehension of what servitude truly entails. It's not just the work, it's the constant, grinding lack of comfort, dignity, and personal space. You sit down on the edge of the pallet, the straw rustling beneath you. It's not just uncomfortable, it feels like it might be actively plotting against your spine. You suppose it's better than the street, but right now that feels like a very low bar. As the last of the daylight bleeds from the tiny window, plunging the garret into near total darkness, you pull your thin shawl around you, a completely inadequate defense against the encroaching chill. Your first night as a servant girl in Stockholm is about to begin, and frozen slumber seems like a tragically accurate description of what lies ahead. Sleep, if it even deigned to visit you in that frozen garret, is a fleeting, shallow thing. You're jolted awake not by a gentle sunrise filtering through curtains, because of course there are no curtains, and precious little sun reaches your attic slit, but by a bone-deep chill and the urgent unspoken pressure of impending duties. Or perhaps it's the stirring of one of your roommates, a rustle of straw, and a weary sigh in the darkness that signals the day's true, ungodly beginning. It's still pitch black outside, the kind of profound, inky blackness that presses against your eyelids. The city outside is a slumbering beast, its daytime roar a distant memory. But for you, the workday has already arrived, probably hitching a ride on the frost that's formed on the inside of your tiny window pane. Your beauty sleep, you reflect wryly, was about as long and refreshing as a particularly abrupt sneeze. Stiffly, you rise from your pallet, every joint protesting. The thin blanket offered little protection against the cold that seeped up from the floorboards. Your first thought is warmth, not for yourself, but for the household that still sleeps soundly in their comparatively cozy beds. That's your primary function. After all, a human furnace starter, a provider of comfort you yourself will rarely experience. You pull on your clothes, in the frigid darkness, fingers clumsy with cold. Down the creaking, treacherous attic stairs, you go, each step a careful negotiation in the gloom, praying you don't misjudge and end up in an undignified heap at the bottom. That would certainly be one way to get noticed, though probably not in a career-enhancing fashion. Your first major task is lighting the fires. This isn't a matter of flicking a switch or turning a thermostat. Oh no. This is a battle of wits and perseverance against damp wood, reluctant kindling, and the ever-present threat of filling the kitchen with more smoke than a Viking funeral. The kitchen hearth is priority number one. Without it, there's no hot water for the master's morning ablutions, no porridge, no coffee. Catastrophes of the highest order in a bourgeois Stockholm household. You gather the kindling, splintered pieces of wood, perhaps some tightly twisted paper, if you're lucky, and arrange it carefully in the gaping maw of the hearth. Then the larger logs. Stockholm primarily relied on wood for fuel, with birch being a common choice, though its price was a constant concern for households. Some grander homes might have boasted impressive kakelugnar, tiled stoves in the main rooms, which were more efficient at retaining heat, but the kitchen hearth was a more primal beast. You strike the flint and steel showering sparks onto the tinder. Sometimes it catches quickly a small, hopeful flicker that you coax and blow into a proper flame. Other times, it's a stubborn, infuriating process. The wood might be damp, the tinder might smolder and die, and you're left kneeling in the cold, your fingers aching your eyes, stinging from the occasional puff of acrid smoke. You've heard, old Elin the cook, you'll soon meet properly. Mutter that if you swear at a reluctant fire, it will light faster, out of pure spite. You're tempted to try a few choice words learned from the sailors at the docks, but the fear of Fru Karlsson, materializing out of the shadows like a disapproving ghost, stays your tongue, for now. Finally, with a sigh of relief that almost extinguishes the fragile flame it catches, the fire begins to crackle, a small beacon of warmth in the chilly vastness of the kitchen. But you're not done. There are other fires to light. Perhaps one in the parlor, another in the master's study, ensuring the gentlefolk can descend from their beds into rooms that don't feel like the inside of an ice house. Each fire is its own little drama, its own small victory against the pervasive cold. The precise allocation of these very early morning tasks among different servants in larger households remains a subject of discussion among social historians. In a smaller household like Fru Karlsson's, chances are the newest, lowest-ranking girl, that's you, gets the lion's share of this delightful pre-dawn work. Once the fires are established and beginning to push back the chill, your next delightful assignment awaits hauling water. The house doesn't have taps dispensing an endless supply of hot and cold running anything. Water comes from a well or a pump, likely located in the courtyard or, heaven forbid, down the street. And in the depths of a Stockholm pre-dawn, icy is an understatement. You grab the heavy wooden buckets, their iron handles already cold enough to numb your fingers. Out into the yard you go. The air is so cold it stings your lungs. The ground is often slippery with frost or ice, making each step a potential adventure in unplanned acrobatics. The pump handle itself might be frozen solid, requiring a bit of brute force or a splash of slightly less frozen water if you can find some to get it moving. Then it's the rhythmic clanking and squeaking as you work the handle, drawing up the frigid water from the depths. Bucket by bucket you fill them. They are astonishingly heavy. Your arms are already aching from the fire making, and now this. You suspect your job description secretly includes amateur weightlifter specializing in H2O. You haul the sloshing, freezing burdens back to the kitchen, your shoulders screaming in protest, trying not to spill too much, because that would just mean another trip sooner. And it's not just one or two buckets. It's water. for cooking water, for cleaning water, for the initial rudimentary washing that will occur as the household slowly rouses. One quirky folk belief you might encounter is that spilling water on your way back from the well on the first trip of the morning is bad luck for the entire day. Not that you need any extra incentive to be careful. The thought of an additional trip with those infernal buckets is motivation enough. As you trudge back and forth, the first faint gray light of dawn might be starting to paint the eastern sky. The city begins to stir. A distant cart rumbles, a dog barks. Inside the house, you hear the first creaks and groans from upstairs as the Carlson family contemplates waking up. For them, the day is just beginning. For you, it feels like you've already done half a day's work, fueled by nothing but cold air and determination. The endless toil has well and truly begun, and the sun isn't even properly up yet. The last of the stubborn fires is finally blazing with something resembling enthusiasm, and the water buckets stand temporarily full, though you know their contents will diminish with alarming speed. But there's no time to admire your handiwork or even catch your breath. The pre-dawn chill you endured is already a distant memory, soon to be replaced by a different kind of environmental extreme. As the rest of the household begins to stir, signaled by creaking floorboards overhead and the distant clang of a dropped hairbrush, you are drawn into the gravitational pull of the kitchen, which is rapidly becoming the humming, often chaotic heart of the house. If there's a dedicated cook, a formidable figure like the oft-mentioned Elin, you are her shadow, her fetcher and carrier, her apprentice in the less glamorous arts of peeling and scrubbing. If this is a more modest establishment, congratulations, you get to add junior chef struggling with archaic cookware to your rapidly expanding, entirely unpaid list of job titles. The kitchen, even in a moderately well-off Stockholm home, is a demanding environment. It's often cramped, filled with the looming presence of the great hearth or stove, an arsenal of iron pots, copper pans of varying states of polish, and an array of implements that look vaguely menacing. The air grows thick with the smells of cooking wood smoke, rendering fat simmering grains, and if Fru Carlson's larder is well stocked, perhaps the scent of herbs or spices. It's a far cry from the delicate perfumes of the parlor, and often hotter than the devil's own drawing room, especially once the baking or a large midday meal is in full swing. You're starting to suspect that the main ingredient in every family meal might just be your own perspiration. Meal preparation is a relentless cycle. First, there's the family's breakfast. Perhaps it's porridge, which requires endless stirring to prevent it from sticking and becoming a smoky, inedible disaster. Or maybe it's freshly baked bread, if the household runs to such luxuries daily, accompanied by butter and cheese. While they eat, you're likely grabbing a hasty mouthful of something much plainer, a hunk of yesterday's rye bread, maybe a bit of leftover porridge, eaten standing up, always with one ear cocked for the summons of a bell. The main event is middag, the midday meal, the cornerstone of the day's culinary efforts. This is where the real pressure lies. Potatoes need to be peeled. So many potatoes, you swear they multiply when your back is turned, each one staring at you with its multitude of eyes. Root vegetables are scrubbed and chopped. Salted herring or cod staples of the Swedish diet might need soaking and preparing. Meat, if it appears, requires careful attention. A typical middle-class Stockholm diet during this period revolved heavily around such hearty, if sometimes monotonous, fare. Rye bread was ubiquitous, potatoes were a mainstay, and various forms of preserved fish or pork along with soups and stews, bulked out with grains and seasonal vegetables, form the core of their sustenance. Historians debate the extent to which servants had any creative input into meal planning, or if they strictly followed the mistress's often exacting directives. Given Fru Carlson's stern demeanor, you suspect your culinary suggestions for avant-garde turnip sculptures would not be well received. Then comes the cleaning. Oh, the glorious never-ending cleaning. After every meal, there's a mountain of greasy pots, pans, and dishes to be tackled. Hot water is a precious commodity you've hauled yourself, so it's used sparingly, often supplemented with harsh lye-based soap that leaves your hands red raw and chapped. Remember that lovely smooth skin you arrived with. Consider it a fond, distant memory. And the floors. The floors are your nemesis. Wooden planks often bare, or perhaps covered with a simple rug in the grander rooms that require constant back-breaking scrubbing. You're on your hands and knees with a stiff brush and a bucket of water, often made more potent with lye, to bleach the wood, or sometimes with sand as an abrasive to really get the grime out. Each stroke is an effort your knees ache. Your back screams in protest, and you become intimately acquainted with every single splinter and nail head in Fru Carlson's domain. You start to measure your life in floorboards scrubbed rather than minutes passed. It's not just the kitchen and dining area floors either. There are hallways, stairs, perhaps even the less used parlors. And when you're not scrubbing, you're dusting. Dust, you quickly learn, is a sentient, malevolent force settling on every surface the moment you turn your back. You polish what little brass or silver the Carlsons possess, trying to coax a gleam from dull surfaces. You might be tasked with cleaning windows using a mixture of vinegar and water, and perhaps old newspapers, if available, to try and bring some clarity to the grimy panes that separate you from the outside world. And let's not forget the truly delightful chore of emptying chamber pots, a task that requires a strong stomach and the ability to hold your breath for extended periods. It's amazing how quickly one's romantic notions of domestic service evaporate when faced with the unglamorous realities of human biology. A quirky superstition you might pick up from Elin the cook, if she exists in your particular narrative hell, is that you must always stir stews and sauces clockwise. To stir counterclockwise is to invite bad luck, or worse, to stir out the flavor. She might also tell you that if a pot boils over unexpectedly, it means visitors are on their way, which usually just means more work for you, so you find yourself eyeing every simmering pot with a newfound sense of dread. You're tempted to ask if there's a special way to scrub the floor to make money appear on it, but you suspect the answer would involve more scrubbing, not less. The midday misery of heat steam and endless scrubbing eventually subsides, but only to make way for the afternoon's round of duties. There's rarely a moment to sit to rest, to simply be. The demands are constant, the work relentless. You are a cog in a machine that must keep turning, and your fuel is exhaustion. The frenzy of the midday meal and the subsequent Herculean cleaning efforts have finally drawn to a close, leaving behind a kitchen that's momentarily blessedly quiet and relatively clean. But don't you dare think about putting your feet up, not even for a second. The afternoon probably involved a fresh set of tasks, perhaps beating rugs outside until your arms felt like lead, or running errands through the bustling Stockholm streets, a brief, bewildering exposure to the world beyond Fru Carlson's walls before being reabsorbed into its domestic machinery. Now, as the daylight outside begins to fade, casting long shadows through those reluctantly cleaner windows, the evening chapter of your servitude unfolds. It's a quieter kind of toil, but no less demanding, no less wearying. First, there's the evening meal to consider, often called aftenvard. It's generally simpler than the midday middag, perhaps leftovers creatively, or not so creatively repurposed, or maybe some bread cheese and pickled fish. But it still requires preparation, laying the table, serving, and then of course the inevitable clearing away and washing of dishes. You move through these tasks with a practiced, if increasingly leaden, efficiency. Your body aches in places you didn't know existed, and your mind is a dull fog of fatigue. But the work must go on. You're like a clockwork doll, wound up in the morning and expected to keep ticking perfectly until the very last task is complete. Any faltering, any dropped plate, or forgotten salt cellar could invite a sharp reprimand. Once the final dish from the evening meal is washed and put away, and the kitchen is set to rights for the night, you might imagine a moment of peace. Perhaps a quiet sit by the dying embers of the kitchen fire. A radical thought. No, your evening's work is often centered around the mending basket. This is a quintessential female servant's task in the dimly lit hours after the main household has retired to their parlors or studies to read converse or perhaps play a genteel card game. You, however, are about to embark on an epic battle against wear and tear. You'll likely be given a spot in the kitchen, or perhaps a corner of a less formal sitting area if the family isn't using it equipped with a flickering tallow candle, or if Fru Carlson is feeling particularly extravagant with her household budget, a slightly better oil lamp. Lighting was a significant expense in this era. Tallow candles made from rendered animal fat were the most common source of illumination for ordinary folk and servant areas. They had the distinct disadvantages of smelling faintly of burnt meat, dripping grease everywhere, and providing a smoky, unsteady light that made fine work a particular challenge. Beeswax candles, or cleaner burning oil lamps, were far superior, but also far costlier, usually reserved for the family's use. So you squint in the gloom, your needle, a tiny glinting weapon against an army of frayed cuffs, fallen hems and socks that appear to be more whole than fabric. Honestly, some of these socks look like they've seen active service in a very tiny, very localized war. Your fingers already sore and chapped from the day's scrubbing fumble with the needle and thread. Darning socks becomes a meditative, if mind-numbingly dull, activity. You patch shirts, turn collars, and cuffs on well-worn garments to give them a new lease on life, and painstakingly re-sew buttons that have made a bid for freedom. Every item belongs to the household. Your own meager wardrobe, if it needs mending, will have to wait for some mythical sliver of personal time that never seems to materialize. The extent to which servants were allowed or able to undertake their own mending during these evening hours, or if that had to be squeezed into their even more limited free time, is a point of ongoing research among social historians. You suspect it falls under the category of your problem, not ours. The eye strain is immense, and you often find yourself blinking hard, trying to refocus in the wavering light. It's a small wonder every servant girl didn't end up needing spectacles thicker than jam jar bottoms. There are old wives' tales and superstitions attached to sewing, especially at night. Some say, "Sew by night, repent by day," meaning stitches made in poor light will look a mess in the morning. Another quirky belief you might hear whispered is that if you accidentally sew a strand of your own hair into a garment, the wearer will think of you often, though whether that's a good or bad thing depends heavily on the wearer. And Fru Carlson doesn't strike you as the sentimental type. You become so familiar with the family's undergarments and linens that you could probably identify them by touch in a completely dark room, a skill you sincerely hope you'll never actually need. And just when you think your eyes are about to cross permanently and your back will fuse into a question mark shape, there are still preparations for the next day's grind. It's like a horror movie where the monster just keeps getting up. You might need to lay out the master's clothes for the morning, ensuring every item is brushed and ready. Shoes need to be cleaned and polished until they reflect your weary face. Perhaps there's kindling to be brought in and stacked by the hearths, or grains to be set to soak for the morning's porridge, shaving a few precious minutes off tomorrow's pre-dawn marathon. Historians continue to analyze diaries and household accounts to determine the average number of hours per day a general servant was actively working, with estimates often exceeding 16 hours, a truly staggering figure. The house settles into a deeper quiet. The family's laughter or muted conversations from the parlor fade as they retire to their beds. You, however, are still moving a silent ghost, ensuring the smooth unfolding of their tomorrow. Finally, when the last sock is darned to within an inch of its life, and the last boot gleams dully in the candlelight, you might be dismissed. You trudge back up those all too familiar stairs to your cold garret, every muscle screaming in protest. You don't so much get into your pallet as collapse onto it the straw, rustling a weary welcome. Sleep claims you quickly, but it's the sleep of the utterly exhausted, dreamless, and brief. Because in what feels like mere moments, the chill and the darkness will call you forth again to repeat the whole relentless cycle. The oblivion of sleep, short-lived as it was, offers a brief escape, but the familiar chill of the garret and the protesting symphony from your overworked muscles soon drag you back to consciousness. It's dark again naturally, and your stomach, that ever-present internal clock, is already making its opinions known with a series of hollow rumbles. You could swear it's composing a mournful ballad titled Ode to an Empty Plate. Food. The thought of it is a powerful motivator, a flickering candle in the gloom of your endless chores. But then, reality bites colder than the draft seeping under the attic door. The food you'll prepare, the food whose rich aromas will soon fill the house, is not by and large for you. Your own breakfast, if it can be dignified with such a term, is a hasty, meager affair. Perhaps a small bowl of thin porridge, often unsweetened and unsalted, or a crust of dark, dense rye bread, washed down with a gulp of weak, lukewarm ale or chicory-laced coffee. It's fuel just enough to get your limbs moving, consumed quickly while you're already starting on the morning's tasks. Stoking those fires again, remember? Or beginning the endless cycle of water hauling. There's no lingering over a warm cup, no pleasant conversation. Just a functional intake of calories before the real work and the real cooking for others begins. As the kitchen comes to life and you start preparing the Carlsons' breakfast and later their substantial midday meal, you are enveloped in a cloud of tantalizing smells. The sizzle of bacon if they're indulging, the comforting aroma of baking bread or pastries if it's a special occasion, or Fru Carlson has a sweet tooth, the savory scent of a simmering stew, rich with meat and vegetables. Your nostrils twitch, your mouth might water involuntarily, and your stomach rumbles in hopeful, then disappointed protest. It's a unique form of daily torture, this constant proximity to abundance, while subsisting on its periphery. You are the conductor of an orchestra of flavors, but you're only allowed to lick the baton. When your own turn to eat finally arrives, usually after the family has finished and the best has been consumed or set aside for their later enjoyment, it's a starkly different picture. Your plate, if you even get a plate, sometimes it's just a bowl or a piece of bread acting as one, will likely feature the scraps and leavings. This isn't a charmingly rustic meal. It's the literal dregs. Perhaps it's the slightly burnt bits from the bottom of the pan, the gristly ends of the meat, the wilted outer leaves of vegetables, or a congealed portion of what was hours ago a more appealing dish. Sometimes it's just bread, and a thin, watery broth perhaps, with a few lonely potato chunks swimming sadly within. This soup might be made from the bones and vegetable peelings that were deemed unfit for the main meal, simmered for hours to extract every last vestige of flavor, which by the time it reaches you isn't much. The contrast is brutal. You've just served the family, say a hearty meat pie with a golden crust accompanied by buttered carrots and roasted potatoes. Your portion, a sliver of the less successful end of the pie, maybe, or more likely, just the gravy-soaked crumbs scraped from the serving dish, bulked out with that ever-present rye bread. It's a daily tangible reminder of your place in the household hierarchy. The board part of your meager wages, food and lodging, was a significant component of a servant's compensation. However, the quality and quantity were entirely at the discretion of the employer. And let's just say generosity in this department wasn't always a prevailing virtue. Nutritional historians continue to debate the average caloric intake of female domestic servants in this period and its long-term health consequences. But it's safe to say, your diet isn't exactly setting you up for peak athletic performance, despite the Olympic levels of physical exertion required. Perpetual hunger becomes your unwelcome companion. It's a dull ache that's always there, sometimes sharpening into a painful gnawing. You learn to ignore it to push through it, but it colors everything. It makes the days seem longer, the work harder. Your energy levels dip especially in the afternoons before the equally uninspiring evening meal. You might find yourself fantasizing about food, dreaming of elaborate feasts only to wake up to the cold reality of your garret and the prospect of another day of culinary teasing. It's like being on a new fad diet called eau de food. You get to smell everything, taste almost nothing. This constant scarcity could breed a certain cunning. Some servants became adept at making the inedible almost palatable. A carefully hoarded onion skin might be accidentally dropped into the servant's soup pot for a hint of flavor. Or there might be a whispered conspiracy in the kitchen, a sort of waste not want not, but let's define waste loosely agreement, where slightly bruised fruit or the trimmings from a roast might find their way into a servant's pocket rather than the slop pail. One quirky, perhaps apocryphal tidbit is the tale of servants who would save the drippings from the meat spit, mix it with oatmeal or breadcrumbs, and bake it into poverty cakes, a desperate attempt to add some richness to their diet. You also quickly learn which of the household's discarded items might actually be a treat. The crunchy caramelized bits stuck to the bottom of a baking dish ambrosia. The temptation to pilfer something more substantial is always there, a devil on your shoulder, whispering about the leftover pastry in the pantry or the heel of that good cheese. But the risks are enormous. Being caught stealing food was a common reason for instant dismissal, leaving you without a position, without a reference, and back on the streets. So you mostly endure your stomach's complaints, a constant private grievance. Your world is in many ways defined by food, its preparation for others, its aromas, tantalizing you, and its stark absence in sufficient quantity for yourself. That constant gnawing hunger you carry around like an unwelcome shadow is, of course, directly linked to the other gaping void in your life, the one in your purse. Or more accurately, the one where a purse might be if you had enough coins to warrant owning such an accessory. Your pitiful wages, those 20 riksdaler a year that sounded vaguely promising when Fru Carlson first uttered the figure, are turning out to be as elusive and insubstantial as the steam from your morning porridge. You're beginning to understand that economic freedom for someone in your position is less a distant dream and more a cruel joke whispered by the biting Stockholm wind. Let's talk about those 20 riksdaler. It's your annual salary. When you break it down, the amount per day is so laughably small, it would barely buy a stale bread roll from the grumpiest baker in Gamlistan. And that's assuming you ever see it in its glittering metallic entirety. The Lego Stadgan, that ever-present Servant Act, stipulated that wages were often paid annually or semi-annually, usually around the autumn moving day, when yearly contracts traditionally ended. This means for months, potentially the better part of a year, you're working entirely on credit, trusting that your employer will make good on their promise. It's a long, anxious wait, like anticipating a birthday that might get canceled at the last minute due to unforeseen, well, anything Fru Carlson deems an inconvenience. Then there's the delightful practice of docking your pay. Oh, the myriad creative ways your hard-earned pennies can vanish before they even materialize. Did you accidentally chip a plate while washing up your hands numb from the cold water and exhaustion docked? Was Fru Carlson dissatisfied with the sheen on her husband's boots, claiming your polishing lacked a certain je ne sais quoi of servitude docked? Did you dare to look tired, or perhaps even sigh audibly, after hauling 6 buckets of water up 3 flights of stairs that could be interpreted as sullenness or insolence? Docked, docked, docked. It feels like navigating a minefield where every misstep, however tiny or unintentional, results in a financial explosion that only affects your pocket. If you fall ill, even from the freezing conditions of your garret, or the poor food any days you're unable to work, are prime candidates for wage reduction. Never mind that your illness is a direct consequence of your employment conditions. Logic you're learning has very little to do with the economics of service. And then there's the ingenious system of being paid in kind. This is where things get truly interesting in a soul-crushingly depressing sort of way. Instead of cold hard cash, which you could in theory spend as you please, though on what, with so little, is another question, you might be gifted items. Perhaps it's an old dress of the mistress's, something she hasn't worn since the Gustav III era, complete with faded patches and a style that screams yesteryear's charity case. Or you might receive a length of coarse, scratchy fabric ostensibly for you to make into a new apron or shift, though you'll have to find the time and energy to sew it yourself by flickering candlelight naturally. Sometimes, as a bonus, Fru Carlson might bestow upon you a particularly hideous bonnet she was given by a tasteless aunt. So, out of fashion, it was probably de rigueur when Vikings were still doing their spring shopping in the city. You're expected to gush with tearful gratitude for these treasures, which coincidentally are often valued by your employer at a rate far exceeding their actual worth, further diminishing the cash portion of your wages. It's like a magic trick, where your salary disappears before your very eyes, replaced by a slightly moth-eaten shawl. Actual physical coins are a rarity in your world. When payday finally, eventually, grudgingly arrives, the amount you receive after all the deductions and payments in kind might be so small it feels like an insult. You clutch the few pieces of copper or silver in your hand, the metal cool against your skin. This is it. This is what months of backbreaking labor, freezing nights, and perpetual hunger amount to. Economic historians continue to analyze account books to determine the true purchasing power of a servant's cash wages, separate from board and lodging, and its impact on their potential for social mobility, or more often, the distinct lack thereof. You don't need an economic historian to tell you that your current fortune won't be buying you a villa by the sea anytime soon. It might, if you're careful, allow you to buy a new ribbon for your cap, or perhaps a small devotional print from a street vendor if you're feeling reckless. Sending money home to your family, for most girls in your situation, that remains a distant, almost impossible dream. This financial powerlessness is a heavy chain. It keeps you bound to your employer, reliant on their whims, not just for your daily bread, but for every tiny necessity. Leaving a bad position is a terrifying prospect when you have no savings, no safety net. Where would you go? How would you survive until you found another place? It's this lack of economic freedom that underpins so much of your vulnerability. You're not just working for a living. You're caught in a system designed to keep you dependent. You might hear superstitions about money. An itchy palm means coins are coming your way. For you, an itchy palm usually just means you've been scrubbing too hard with lye soap, and the only thing coming your way is more work. Your bank account is essentially the empty tin you hide under your straw pallet, containing mostly dust bunnies and shattered illusions of financial independence. Your wages are so elusive they might as well be classified as mythological creatures occasionally glimpsed but never truly captured. The crushing weight of your financial insecurity, those pitiful wages that seem to evaporate before you even touch them, is inextricably linked to the figures who control not just your purse strings, but nearly every aspect of your daily existence. Your masters, and more specifically, your mistress, Fru Carlson. She is the sun around which your tiny toiling planet is forced to revolve, and her gravitational pull is often erratic and unforgiving. Learning to navigate the unpredictable tempers and exacting standards of your employers is perhaps the most complex and exhausting task of all, a constant performance where the script changes daily, and a misread cue can bring down the entire production, mostly on your head. Fru Carlson, you quickly learn, is a woman of particular tastes. And these tastes can shift with the wind or perhaps with the quality of her previous night's sleep, or maybe just based on whether a stray cat looked at her disrespectfully on her way to the market. One day, a speck of dust on the parlor mantelpiece might pass unnoticed. The next, a similar speck could unleash a tirade that makes the Stockholm winter feel like a balmy spring afternoon. Her standards are exacting, often bordering on the physically impossible. The floors must not just be clean, but gleam in a way that suggests they were polished by angels using unicorn tears. The soup must be perfectly hot, the bread perfectly fresh, her corsets laced perfectly tight, even if your fingers are numb from cold, and your stomach is rumbling from lack of your own, perfectly anything. You're beginning to suspect her ideal servant is a silent, invisible automaton that runs on, praise it never receives. Her temper is a landscape you must learn to chart, full of hidden volcanoes and sudden squalls. A raised eyebrow could signal impending doom. A tightly pursed lip might be the prelude to a lecture on the inherent slothfulness of your generation. Shouting isn't uncommon, a sharp, percussive sound that makes you jump internally, even as you maintain an outward composure of meek attentiveness. You'd give your non-existent yearly bonus for a reliable weather forecast of her moods. But since meteorology, for mistresses, hasn't been invented yet, you resort to hypervigilance. Is she humming dangerously good mood, likely to be shattered by the first perceived infraction? Is she silent and brooding? Batten down the hatches, a storm is brewing. You're developing an advanced degree in Fru Carlson-ology with a minor in interpreting the subtle twitch of Herr Carlson's left nostril, which usually means he's about to ask for something complicated right when you're in the middle of 3 other urgent tasks. Kindness in this household is a rare commodity like sunshine in November. It's not that Fru Carlson is necessarily a monster from a Gothic novel 24 hours a day. Historians debate whether the stereotypical portrayal of the tyrannical mistress in popular literature of the period accurately reflected the majority of employer-servant relationships, or was an exaggeration for dramatic effect. But even if she isn't actively plotting your demise with poison porridge, the baseline is one of authority and distance, not warmth or empathy. On the rare occasion, a word of something approaching approval escapes her lips. The herring wasn't entirely inedible today, girl. You almost don't know how to react. Is it a trap? A test a sign that the apocalypse is nigh. A genuine smile from her is so infrequent, it would probably warrant a citywide celebration, or at least a very confused entry in your mental diary. Herr Carlson is often a more distant figure, absorbed in his business or his newspaper, but he too has his demands and expectations usually filtered through his wife. If there are children, they add another layer of complexity, sometimes treating you with the casual cruelty of the unthinkingly privileged, demanding your attention, messing up what you've just cleaned, and then tattling to mama if you dare to look anything less than thrilled by their antics. So you learn to navigate. You become an expert in the art of self-effacement, of making yourself small and unobtrusive. You listen for the cadence of footsteps on the floorboards above, distinguishing Fru Carlson's determined tread from Herr Carlson's heavier one. You try to anticipate her needs before she voices them. A shawl fetched before she shivers, her preferred teacup, warmed the newspaper, ironed to crisp perfection. Yes, some households did that. This constant vigilance is exhausting, a form of emotional labor that drains you almost as much as scrubbing floors. The Lego Stadgan, the Servant Act, was very clear on an employer's right to command obedience and deference, and equally clear on their right to correct a servant. While outright physical abuse might have been becoming less common in urban settings like Stockholm by the mid to late 19th century, the threat was always there, and verbal corrections could be withering. You had virtually no recourse against an unfair employer. Their word was law, and a bad reference or no reference at all could be a sentence to unemployment and destitution. Servants, of course, developed their own folklore for dealing with such capricious rule. An old cook might have muttered, "A quiet mistress is a thinking mistress," and that's usually worse than a shouting one, which you find to be disturbingly true. Or perhaps there's a truly bizarre household rule you must adhere to, like ensuring all tassels on the curtains hang at precisely the same angle, a task that requires a protractor and the patience of a saint. You once heard a quirky, whispered piece of advice from another girl at the hiring market If the mistress is in a black mood, compliment her ugliest hat. It confuses them. You haven't been brave or foolish enough to try that one yet with Fru Carlson. Her hats are all fairly formidable. The power imbalance is absolute. You are dependent on them for everything. Food, shelter, your meager wage, your very reputation. This knowledge shapes every interaction, forcing a constant performance of willing subservience regardless of your true feelings. Sociologists and historians continue to discuss the psychological strategies servants employed to maintain a sense of self-worth and agency in the face of often demeaning treatment from their employers. For you right now, it mostly involves a lot of silent counting to 10 and perfecting a facial expression that conveys, yes, Fru Carlson scrubbing the cat with buttermilk is an excellent idea, Fru Carlson. Dealing with the capricious rule of Fru Carlson and the general unpredictability of your employers is a draining daily battle. You're constantly on edge, trying to anticipate their needs and avoid their displeasure. But are you entirely alone in this gilded cage? What about others who share your lot, the fellow inhabitants of the below-stairs world? Here amongst your peers, you discover another complex layer of existence, a realm of subtle hierarchies, unspoken rules, shared grievances, and sometimes the fragile tendrils of friendship. If the Carlson household is large enough to employ more than just you, and for your sanity, let's hope it is, even if it means more competition for those leftover potato peelings, you'll quickly learn that the servant sphere has its own pecking order, as rigid and keenly observed as any noble court. At the apex of the kitchen domain, if one exists, is the cook, perhaps the formidable Elin we've hypothesized about. She, or occasionally he, in very grand establishments, rules the scullery and larder with an iron ladle. Her word is law when it comes to all things culinary, and her moods can make or break the atmosphere of the kitchen, that surprisingly central hub of servant life. A mainstream historical fact is that in larger Swedish households this hierarchy was quite defined below the husfru mistress and any husmamsel housekeeper. You'd find specialized roles, like the kokerska cook, the barnpiga nanny, if children were present, the jungfru chambermaid or parlor maid responsible for the finer rooms and the family's direct needs, and then at the bottom of the heap, girls like you, the underman, the general maid, the fetcher and carrier of everything no one else wants to fetch or carry. Even in a more modest household with just 2 servants, one would inevitably be senior, often by sheer dint of having survived there longer. You learn your place quickly, usually through a sharp word or a pointedly ignored request. This hierarchy can be a source of friction of petty tyrannies that mirror those from upstairs. The senior maid might save the slightly less backbreaking tasks for herself, or claim the marginally warmer spot by the kitchen fire on a cold night. But it can also paradoxically be a source of learning. An experienced cook, even a grumpy one, might grudgingly impart essential skills if only to stop you from ruining every pot. An older maid might offer a cynical but useful piece of advice on how to manage a particular chore or navigate one of Fru Carlson's more bewildering demands. Just nod and agree, dearie, she might whisper as you're about to protest an impossible order. It's quicker than arguing, and she'll forget she even asked for it by tomorrow. Sage advice, probably born from years of bitter experience. The most potent bonding agent, however, is the shared grievance. Misery, as they say, loves company, and there's a certain grim satisfaction in the quietly exchanged sigh after the mistress has swept out of the room, or the rolled eyes when an unreasonable demand is made. in hushed tones when you're sure no one from the family is within earshot, perhaps while scrubbing the back steps or huddled in the chilly scullery, you might share complaints. The long hours, the bad food a perennial favorite, the mistress's latest baffling pronouncement. These whispered litanies of woe are the unofficial servant anthem, creating a sense of us against them that for a few moments at least makes the burden feel a tiny bit lighter. The kitchen's gossip network, you'll discover, is often faster and more efficient than any official news outlet, especially concerning who's in favor, who's in trouble, and whose turn it is to empty the particularly unpleasant slop bucket. Out of these shared sighs and secret complaints, occasional acts of solidarity can bloom. Someone might subtly cover for your minor mistake, distracting Fru Carlson at a critical moment. A fellow servant might slip you a slightly larger piece of bread from her own meager portion if you're looking particularly faint. Maybe you'll help another girl lift a heavy coal scuttle when her back is turned, or she'll warn you that the master is in a foul temper before you walk into the lion's den. These small acts of kindness are like finding a rare wildflower growing in a crack in the pavement, unexpected and precious. The extent to which servant communities were able to exert any collective influence over their working conditions is a matter of ongoing debate among labor historians. But these tiny individual acts of mutual support certainly made a difference to daily survival. Yet these friendships are often fragile. The very nature of your existence is insecure. You are all to some extent rivals. Rivals for the slightly less awful chores, rivals for any scrap of approval from upstairs, as if rivals for the sheer space to breathe in your cramped quarters. If food is scarce, generosity has its limits. If someone is dismissed, there's little you can do. And there's always the underlying fear that a confidence shared might be betrayed accidentally or deliberately if it means currying favor or avoiding blame. Trust is a rare and delicate ingredient in the below-stairs stew. Historians continue to piece together the informal rules and support systems that characterized below-stairs culture, trying to understand how much genuine autonomy this subculture afforded servants within the rigid structures of the employing household. Sometimes you might hear of quirky little traditions or secret codes that servants in other houses use. Perhaps a certain way of folding the laundry signals that the coast is clear for a forbidden chat, or a specific cough means the mistress is approaching look busy. One rather charming, if possibly apocryphal tidbit is the idea of a button tin kept secretly by servants, where each button represented a particularly egregious demand or a moment of shared laughter, a tangible, if hidden record of their collective experience. You and your fellow servants might not have anything so organized, but a shared knowing glance across a room can speak volumes, a silent acknowledgement of the absurdity and hardship of your lives. These connections, however tenuous, are lifelines in a sea of drudgery and deference. They remind you that you are not entirely alone, even if that shared aloneness is often tinged with the anxieties of your precarious position. Those fragile bonds you forge in the hushed corners of the kitchen or over shared weary sighs with your fellow servants offer a sliver of human connection in your otherwise isolated world. But what about time that is truly your own? A moment to breathe, to think, to simply be without the constant shadow of your duties or the scrutinizing gaze of Fru Carlson? Ah, free time. The very concept in your current circumstances seems almost fantastical, like a tale of mythical lands where floors scrub themselves and mistresses dispense compliments like candy. Your leisure, you'll quickly discover, is as rare and fleeting as a warm day in a Stockholm January, and usually just as closely managed. Remember Fru Carlson's magnanimous offer during your hiring, one afternoon off a month perhaps, if I'm feeling generous. That perhaps looms large, and her generosity often seems to be in short supply, especially if there's an extra load of laundry or unexpected guests. Your free time is so brief, you could miss it if you blink too slowly. The Tjänstehjonsstadgan, the Servant Act, did nod towards a servant's right to attend church on Sundays, and holy days provided essential duties were completed. This, provided duties were completed, was of course the escape clause large enough to march an army through. What constituted essential and completed was entirely up to your employer's interpretation, which could be remarkably elastic. So Sunday church is often your primary officially sanctioned excursion into the outside world. Getting ready for it is naturally another set of tasks. Your one good dress, likely a hand-me-down or something you painstakingly sewed yourself from cheap fabric, must be spotless. Your shoes, the same ones that tramp through muddy courtyards and up dusty stairs, must be respectably clean. You are, after all, representing the Carlson household, and any slovenliness on your part would reflect badly on them. The church service itself offers a change of scenery, a chance to sit a novel experience, and listen to something other than orders or complaints. The soaring hymns and the pastor's sermon might offer some spiritual solace, or they might just be a drone against which you plan your strategy for removing that stubborn grease stain from Herr Carlson's waistcoat. More practically, church is a place to see other faces, to feel, however briefly, like part of a larger community. You might exchange a swift, knowing glance with another servant girl from a neighboring house, a silent acknowledgement of your shared lot. Sometimes, if you're incredibly daring, and the oversight isn't too intense, a whispered word or two might be exchanged in the churchyard afterwards. But you're always aware of being to some extent on display. Fru Carlson might not be physically holding your hand, but her expectations of demure, pious behavior follow you like a shadow. Social historians debate whether Sunday church attendance was primarily a religious observance for servants, a valued social opportunity, or simply another form of employer-mandated control and public display of household piety. For you, it's probably a confusing cocktail of all three, with a heavy splash of just glad to be out of the house for an hour. Then there are errands. Being sent to the market for fresh herring, to the baker for rye bread, or to the seamstress with a garment needing alteration. These are your version of an adventure holiday. These brief forays into the bustling city streets offer tantalizing glimpses of a life beyond servitude. You see people laughing, arguing, going about their business with an air of freedom that seems utterly alien to you. The sounds, the smells, a wild mix of horse manure, street food, and expensive perfume, the sheer chaotic vitality of Stockholm. It's a sensory feast after the muted, controlled environment of the Carlson home. But even these moments are tightly constrained. Don't dawdle is Fru Carlson's standard parting shot, often accompanied by a precise list of instructions and an expectation that you'll return with the correct items, the correct change, and in an impossibly short amount of time. Still, you might snatch an extra 30 seconds to gaze at a shop window displaying colorful ribbons, or listen to a street musician's lively tune, Small Stolen Sips of Freedom. Any other form of leisure is virtually non-existent. Fru Carlson's no followers rule is absolute, meaning no visitors, especially not of the male persuasion, are permitted. This was a common stipulation born from employers' anxieties about theft, moral propriety, and the potential for servants to develop lives and loyalties outside the household. Historians debate how strictly rules regarding servants' followers were enforced and what this reveals about employers' anxieties regarding servants' private lives. In your case, the rule seems ironclad: a quiet walk on your own. Unlikely, unless it's disguised as an errand to a very distant shop for a very specific and probably non-existent type of button. You might hear tell of certain spots in the city where servants unofficially congregated on their rare afternoons off. Perhaps a particular bench in Kungsträdgården Park or near a certain fountain in Gamla Stan became a known meeting point for exchanging news, sharing grievances, or even engaging in a bit of hopeful flirtation. One quirky tidbit you might overhear is talk of a specific vendor near the Katarina Church steps who sold exceptionally cheap but surprisingly potent coffee, a rare treat that could make an hour of freedom feel almost luxurious. But accessing these small pleasures requires that rare combination of a permitted afternoon off a destination deemed acceptable by your mistress, and perhaps even a hoarded skilling or two, or even when you are nominally free, the feeling of being closely watched, or at least of being accountable for every moment, persists. You are never truly off the clock. Your conduct, your appearance, your associations, all are subject to scrutiny and judgment. It's like being a prize turnip at the county fair, constantly under evaluation, even when you're just trying to enjoy a moment's respite. Your approved list of leisure activities seems to be breathing quietly, mending your own clothes if you have any energy left, and contemplating the endless mountain of work still to be done. These fleeting, heavily supervised moments of freedom serve mostly to highlight the profound lack of autonomy that defines your everyday existence, making the brief escape almost bittersweet. Those rare, fleeting moments of freedom you experience, a supervised walk to church, a hurried errand through the clamorous city streets, are quickly swallowed by the relentless demands of your service. And just as your autonomy is constantly constrained, so too is your physical well-being under perpetual threat. In your world of drafty garrets, meager sustenance, and bone-wearying toil, illness is not an occasional inconvenience. It's a wolf constantly circling, sniffing for any sign of weakness. Your access to proper medical care, or even the basic human need for rest when you're unwell. Well, let's just say Fru Carlson isn't about to set up a convalescent home in her parlor for your benefit. The very conditions of your life are a perfect breeding ground for ailments and aches. That freezing attic you call a bedroom, where the damp seeps into your bones and the wind whistles a mournful lullaby through the cracks. Prime territory for coughs, colds that linger for weeks, and the painful, itching torment of chilblains on your fingers and toes during the long Stockholm winters. The perpetual hunger and the watery, unvaried diet we discussed earlier do little to bolster your defenses. You're running on empty most of the time, making you an easy target for any passing malady. Add to this the sheer physical exhaustion from 16-hour days of scrubbing, hauling, and standing, and it's a wonder you're upright at all. Your immune system, you suspect, is probably considering forming a union and going on strike for better working conditions. Common complaints become your unwelcome companions. A hacking cough that rattles your chest, a sore throat that makes swallowing your already unappetizing food and agony hands so chapped from lye and icy water that they crack and bleed, inviting infection. Stomach upsets are frequent, hardly surprising, given the dubious quality of some of the leftover food or the often questionable city water supply. And then there are the more serious specters, fevers that leave you shivering one moment and burning the next, the dreaded influenza or la grippe that can sweep through a household, and persistent racking coughs that whisper of consumption. Tuberculosis, the White Plague, was a terrifyingly common scourge in 19th century Stockholm, particularly amongst the poor, living in crowded, unsanitary conditions. The thought of that particular illness settling in your lungs is a cold dread that sits heavier than any unserved dinner tray. So what happens when you inevitably succumb? When you wake up with your head pounding your limbs, aching, and a feverish glint in your eye, your first hurdle is convincing Fru Carlson that you are genuinely unwell and not merely engaging in an elaborate ruse to avoid polishing the silver. Her default expression upon hearing of a servant's ailment is usually one of thinly veiled annoyance and skepticism. A slight sniffle, is it? Well, a bit of hard work will sweat that out of you, girl. Your sick leave policy seems to be, don't get sick. And if you do, try not to make it too inconvenient for everyone else. Or else, if your illness is deemed too severe to ignore, perhaps you've dramatically fainted while serving the soup, which is generally frowned upon, you won't be seeing a doctor. Physicians were for the wealthy, for those who could afford their fees and their mysterious Latin pronouncements. Instead, you'll be subjected to the repository of household medical wisdom, which usually means Fru Carlson's favorite home remedies or advice from Elin the cook if she's feeling charitable. This could involve anything from herbal teas of dubious origin, nettle perhaps, or something bitter that's good for the humors, to strange-smelling poultices applied to your chest or throat. One quirky folk remedy you might encounter involves wearing a small bag containing a dried toad or a specific assortment of pungent herbs around your neck to ward off fevers or evil airs. You might also be advised to drink water in which a blacksmith has cooled his irons, a practiced thought to strengthen the blood, though it probably just added a metallic tang to your misery. Some of these concoctions taste so vile, you almost prefer the illness. Rest is another luxury you can ill afford. Unless you are demonstrably incapable of standing, you'll likely be expected to perform at least some of your duties. Perhaps you'll be excused from the heaviest lifting, but still tasked with mending by the dim kitchen light, your head swimming and your fingers fumbling. The fear of being seen as delicate, or worse, chronically ill, is immense. A servant who is often sick is a liability, and dismissal is a constant threat. The degree to which employers felt any moral or legal obligation to provide medical assistance to sick servants beyond rudimentary first aid or traditional remedies is a complex question that varies greatly in historical accounts. Often, it extended only as far as ensuring you weren't contagious to the family. The long-term consequences of this neglect are significant. Minor illnesses, without proper rest and care, can drag on, weakening you further. Chronic conditions can develop. Historians and medical anthropologists continue to assess the efficacy and cultural significance of folk remedies used by working-class populations, distinguishing between potentially harmful practices and those that may have offered some palliative or psychological comfort. But for you, the reality is that your health is largely in your own chapped hands, and your primary treatment option is often sheer willpower and the desperate hope that you'll recover quickly enough not to lose your precarious position. This constant dance with ailments and aches adds another layer of anxiety to a life already brimming with hardship, a reminder that in this unforgiving city, even your own body can feel like an unreliable ally. That constant battle to keep your body from succumbing to illness in your drafty, damp surroundings is just one facet of the perpetual vigilance your life demands. Beyond the fevers and the racking coughs, there are other dangers more insidious, perhaps, that lurk in the shadows of the Carlson household. These are the whispers of accusation, the unwelcome glint in a master's eye, and the ever-present cold dread of instant dismissal. You live under a constant, invisible cloud of peril, where a wrong word, a misplaced item, or simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time can bring your precarious world crashing down. The accusation most feared, the one that can shatter a servant girl's reputation and future in an instant, is theft. A missing silver spoon, a few coins gone from a drawer, a piece of ribbon that Fru Carlson vaguely remembers owning. In the tense, suspicious atmosphere of many households, the finger of blame often swings wildly and lands with unerring accuracy on the nearest, most vulnerable target, you. It doesn't matter if you're innocent, if the item was merely misplaced, or if, heaven forbid, someone else in the household with more power and less integrity was responsible. Your word against theirs, it's a feather against a boulder. A mainstream historical fact is that a servant's testimony, particularly when accused by an employer, carried significantly less weight in any formal or informal system of justice. Proving your innocence when you have no status, no advocate, and every circumstantial possibility stacked against you is a near impossible task. The consequences could range from instant dismissal without a reference, a disaster in itself, to being handed over to the authorities. But theft isn't the only arrow in the quiver of potential accusations. Laziness, insolence, which could mean anything from a genuinely impertinent remark to simply not looking sufficiently subservient, gossiping, breaking an item through supposed carelessness. All can be grounds for severe reprimands, docking of your already pitiful wages, or outright dismissal. You quickly learn that maintaining an air of diligent, silent industry, even when you're running on fumes, and your mind is a whirl of exhaustion and hunger is a vital survival skill. You're pretty sure your ability to appear completely absorbed in polishing a doorknob while simultaneously listening for the creak of Fru Carlson's approach is reaching Olympic levels. Then there's the deeply unsettling, often unspoken danger of unwanted attention. As a young woman in a household, particularly one with male employers, their sons or male guests, you are in a position of extreme vulnerability. A lingering gaze, a compliment that makes your skin crawl, a hand that accidentally brushes against yours a little too often, or more overt and terrifying advances. These are perils that many servant girls faced. It's an impossible no-win situation. Resisting too forcefully could lead to accusations of impertinence, a fabricated story of your own misconduct, and inevitably dismissal. Yet not resisting, or being unable to resist, could lead to social ruin, pregnancy, and an even more certain and devastating dismissal, often with the added burden of a child you cannot support. The silence surrounding this particular occupational hazard was profound. Historians continue to debate the prevalence of sexual harassment and assault against female domestic servants, as direct evidence is often scarce and coded, but anecdotal accounts and court records, when they exist, suggest it was a significant underreported danger. You learn to make yourself as inconspicuous as possible to avoid being alone in rooms with certain individuals, to develop a sixth sense for potentially compromising situations. It's another layer of constant wearying vigilance. And looming over all of this is the ever-present threat of instant dismissal. Your position is entirely dependent on the whim of your employers. Fru Carlson could decide she needs one less servant to save money. She could take a sudden irrational dislike to the way you part your hair. She could hear of another girl willing to work for even less if that's possible. There's no job security, no notice period to speak of, no severance pay. One moment you have a roof, however leaky over your head, and food however meager in your belly. The next, you could be out on the street with your small bundle facing the terrifying uncertainty of unemployment in a city that has little sympathy for the destitute. You'd need a lawyer on retainer to navigate all these potential pitfalls if only you could afford a lawyer, or a retainer, or even a slightly less watery soup. You might hear quirky superstitions or bits of folk wisdom from other servants about how to ward off such dangers. Some might carry a religious medal or a small, smooth worry stone in their pocket, rubbing it for comfort or protection. Others might whisper about the importance of never stepping on cracks in the floorboards when the master is near, lest it invite bad luck. A more practical, if grim piece of advice often shared was to always ensure another servant was within earshot when dealing with potentially problematic male members of the household or their guests. A fragile shield of potential witness. Some older servants might tell you that if you find a spider frantically spinning a web upwards, it's a good omen. But if it's spinning downwards, it's a sign that trouble or a false accusation is on its way. You're not sure you believe it, but you find yourself eyeing cobwebs with a new and profound interest. Living under this constant shadow of potential disaster takes its toll. It breeds a sense of insecurity that seeps into your very bones, making it difficult to ever truly relax, even in the supposed privacy of your freezing garret. Every unfamiliar sound, every unexpected summons, every shift in your employer's mood can trigger a jolt of anxiety. You are walking a perpetual tightrope, and the fall is a long one. Living under that constant oppressive shadow of potential accusations, unwanted advances, and the ever-looming threat of instant dismissal would be enough to crush anyone's spirit. Each day is a tightrope walk over a chasm of uncertainty. And yet, even in the deepest, darkest corners of your weary existence, a tiny, stubborn spark refuses to be entirely extinguished. It's the flicker of hope, the human insistence on dreaming, however small or improbable those dreams might be. Without these fragile aspirations, the relentless grind of your life as Fru Carlson's servant girl would be truly unbearable. Your dreams aren't of diamond tiaras or grand balls, not usually. Those belong to the penny dreadfuls you might occasionally glimpse, or the fanciful tales whispered by more imaginative girls. No, your hopes are far more modest, rooted in the harsh soil of your reality. You dream of a slightly better life. Perhaps a position in a different household, one where the mistress isn't quite so fond of the sound of her own complaining voice, where the cook doesn't guard the leftover bread like it's the crown jewels, and where the garret might even boast a window that opens and a blanket thick enough to actually ward off the chill. You might fantasize about becoming a chambermaid in a truly grand house, handling fine linens and arranging flowers a step up from the endless scrubbing and hauling. It would still be service, still deference, but perhaps with a touch more dignity, a little less back-breaking toil. Your retirement plan, as it stands, seems to be hopefully not expiring, face down in a bucket of dirty mop water. So any improvement on that would be welcome. The grandest, most pervasive dream for many girls in your situation is marriage. Not necessarily for love, though that would be a delightful almost unthinkable bonus, but as an escape from servitude, from the tyranny of other people's bells and demands. A good marriage, in your world, doesn't mean a wealthy merchant or a dashing officer. It means a steady, sober artisan, a carpenter, perhaps, or a baker with flour perpetually dusting his eyebrows, who has his own small business or reliable employment. Or maybe a farmer from a nearby village, someone with strong hands and a kind face who could offer you a life tied to the seasons rather than a mistress's whims. You imagine a tiny, clean cottage, perhaps with a small garden where you could grow your own vegetables. It would still be a life of hard work, of course, filled with cooking, cleaning, and mending, but it would be your home, your work for your family. No Fru Carlson critiquing your every move. The thought of not having to answer a bell is in itself a kind of paradise. Of course, the path to such a marriage is fraught with obstacles. You have no dowry to speak of, that traditional offering that could smooth the way to a more advantageous match. A mainstream historical fact is that many servant girls did marry, but often later in life than women who hadn't been in service, and frequently to men of similar working class status: laborers, soldiers, other servants. Opportunities to even meet respectable, unattached men are scarce, confined perhaps to fleeting encounters at church or during those hurried errands. And there's always the faint social stigma that can attach itself to servant girls, the assumption by some that they are somehow less than or morally compromised by the very nature of their work and their vulnerability. Social historians debate the extent to which domestic service acted as a marriage market for rural migrant women, or if it more often delayed or even prevented marriage due to these factors. So these hopes are indeed flickering like a candle flame in a drafty hallway. They flare up in moments of quiet desperation. While you're mechanically scrubbing a floor, your mind drifts to that little cottage with the imaginary roses around the door. Or, as you mend yet another of Herr Carlson's voluminous nightshirts, you might picture a future where the only mending you do is for your own children. But just as quickly, the harsh realities of your present can snuff them out. A sharp word from Fru Carlson, an extra load of unexpected work, the gnawing ache of hunger, reminding you of your immediate pressing needs. Your hopes are so dim at times, you feel they need their own tiny candle just to be seen in the gloom of your prospects. You might even indulge in quiet, harmless superstitions, little rituals to try and divine or nudge the future. Some girls believe that if you can peel an apple all in one go, and then throw the peel over your left shoulder, the shape it lands in will be the initial of your future husband. You've tried it once or twice with a pilfered apple core, squinting at the resulting squiggle on the dusty floor, trying to will it into a promising A for Anders or J for Johann. Another quirky tidbit is the belief that finding a four-leaf clover and tucking it into your shoe will lead you to good fortune, or perhaps even a kind sweetheart. You keep an eye out during your rare moments in anything resembling a grassy patch, but mostly you just find more dirt. These small dreams, these flickering hopes, are your secret sustenance. They are the mental space you retreat to when the work is too hard, the mistress too cruel, the future too bleak. They are a testament to your resilience, your quiet refusal to be entirely defined by the drudgery and deprivation of your current lot. They may be dim, they may be uncertain, but they are yours, carefully hoarded treasures in the impoverished landscape of your life. They whisper that someday, somehow, things might be different, even if different just means a slightly warmer room and a little less shouting. The years, like the endless Stockholm winters, have a way of creeping up on you. One day, you're the bewildered new girl, fresh from the countryside, startled by the city's clamor and Fru Carlson's sharp tongue. Then you blink, or so it seems, and decades have somehow slipped through your fingers like fine dust, leaving you a seasoned if weary veteran of domestic service. Those flickering hopes you nurtured, of a slightly kinder mistress, a less back-breaking position, perhaps that small cottage with a loving husband, have been your quiet companions through countless pre-dawn fire lightings and mind-numbing mending sessions. They may have dimmed with time, some perhaps guttering out altogether, but the memory of their warmth lingers. You are no longer the young woman who arrived with a small bundle and wide, frightened eyes. You know this house, its creaks and groans, its hidden dust traps and drafty corners, better than you know the lines on your own aging hands. You've seen children in this household born grow up and perhaps even leave to start families of their own, their fleeting childhood demands replaced by new generations of chores. Fru Carlson herself may have softened slightly with age, her commands less shrill, or perhaps your hearing has just become more selective. Or maybe, just maybe, you've outlasted several of her most irritating habits, much like you've outlasted several sets of her good china, the ones you were always terrified of breaking. But time, while it may bestow a certain familiarity, also exacts its toll. Your body, once strong and capable of enduring endless labor, now protests with a chorus of aches and pains. Your back is permanently stooped from years of bending and scrubbing. Your knees creak like the attic stairs on a frosty night. Your hands, gnarled and stiff, find the fine work of mending increasingly difficult, the needle and elusive torment in the dim evening light. The boundless energy of youth has long since been spent, replaced by a weary, ingrained perseverance. You've become an expert in conserving movement, in finding the least strenuous way to accomplish each task, a skill born not of laziness, but of sheer accumulated exhaustion. Your main inheritance, you sometimes think with a wry internal smile, will be a truly impressive collection of calluses and a profound understanding of the migratory patterns of dust bunnies. The dreams of that idyllic marriage may have faded. Perhaps the right man never came along, or the ones who did weren't quite the saviors you'd envisioned. Or maybe you simply never had the time, the energy, or the opportunity to cultivate such a connection amidst the relentless demands of service. The prospect of a significantly better position also seems more distant now. You might have risen slightly in the household hierarchy if such a thing existed here. Or perhaps you are still fundamentally the general drudge, just an older, slower version. The realization settles not with a crash, but with a quiet sigh that this life of service might very well be all there is. And so, in the quiet hours after the household has retired, and the last embers are dying in the kitchen hearth, you find yourself contemplating the future, a future that seems to offer little security or comfort. What happens when your hands are too shaky to pour the morning coffee without spilling, when your eyes are too dim to thread a needle, when your legs can no longer carry you up and down the endless flights of stairs? Employers, even the relatively benign ones, are not in the business of running retirement homes for their aged servants. There are no pensions awaiting you, no gold watch for decades of faithful underpaid labor. The grim reality for many elderly servants in 19th century Sweden, and indeed across much of Europe, was the fatigus, the poorhouse or workhouse. This institution, run by the local Fattigvård Poor Relief Board, offered a last resort for the destitute, the aged, and the infirm, who had no family to care for them. Conditions were often Spartan discipline strict, and the stigma profound. It was a place people entered with dread and rarely left with joy. Historians continue to explore the informal support networks, such as religious groups or former fellow servants, that might have provided some minimal assistance to aged domestics, though evidence for widespread effective support is often fragmented and elusive. You pray you'll be spared, that fate perhaps clinging to a small, carefully hoarded stash of coins that will never be enough, or hoping a distant, forgotten relative might suddenly remember your existence and offer a corner by their fire. You might have heard quirky, melancholic sayings among older servants. One rather bleak tidbit is the notion that if you save every button that falls off your own worn-out clothes throughout your life, their weight might just be enough to ensure you have a simple coffin rather than a pauper's anonymous burial. It's a grim sort of accounting. Perhaps you, like other aging women in your position, find solace in small, treasured keepsakes. A faded pressed flower given to you long ago. A smooth, gray stone from a forgotten walk by the water. A tiny chipped porcelain doll from a childhood that feels like another lifetime. These small things become anchors in the uncertain sea of your later years. You find yourself hoping that if there is a heaven, it has exceedingly comfortable chairs, no bells whatsoever, and an unlimited supply of very good strong tea. The light, both metaphorically and perhaps literally, as you sit in the fading glow of your day, is indeed dimming. The future stretches before you not as a path of exciting possibilities, but as a slow, shadowed descent. Your youthful hopes, once flickering brightly now, cast a softer, more wistful glow, illuminating mostly the past and the stark, unadorned present. The vibrant, demanding city of Stockholm outside your window continues its restless rhythm, largely indifferent to the quiet anxieties of an aging servant girl contemplating her uncertain end within its walls. The work for now continues, as it always has a familiar heavy cloak around your shoulders. And so your story, our shared journey into this life of toil and fleeting moments, begins to draw to a close. The cobbled streets of Stockholm, once so new and daunting, have become the well-worn paths of your daily existence. The grand houses, with their endless demands, have been the backdrop to your quiet endurances. You've navigated the capricious moods of employers, the fragile bonds with fellow servants, the gnawing hunger, and the constant subtle perils that defined your days. Through it all, that small human spark of hope, however battered, has somehow persisted, a quiet testament to the strength found in simply getting through one more day, one more task, one more chilly night. The sounds of your imagined Stockholm begin to recede. Now the clatter of hooves on stone, the distant cries of street vendors, the sharp ring of Fru Carlson's bell, all softening, becoming less urgent. The chill of the garret, the heat of the kitchen stove, the ache in your bones from a lifetime of labor, these too begin to fade from your immediate senses. You are here safe and comfortable, far removed from that world of hardship. Let the weariness of that imagined life drift away like smoke from a distant chimney on a cold morning. Allow your own muscles to relax, your own mind to quiet. The story is told, the day is done, and a peaceful rest awaits. Sweet dreams,